The sound of my phone vibrating on the kitchen counter was the only noise that filled the silence of the morning. I reached over, rubbing my eyes as I glanced at the message on the screen. Can you send the usual $4,000 for my son's school? His tuition's due. I felt that familiar pang in my chest, a mix of obligation and growing resentment. Every month, the same routine, $4,000 for his child's education. The numbers added up, and my bank account kept getting thinner. But today, something felt different. I set the phone down, trying to shake off the unease that had settled over me. I could hear the hum of the coffee maker in the background, but my mind kept drifting back to that nagging thought. Why did I never question it? Why did I keep sending money without ever seeing a bill or a receipt? Was I just being the dutiful grandmother? Or was I being taken for a fool? The thought had been creeping in for weeks now. Something wasn't right. Maybe it was the way he'd started asking more frequently, the little excuses about his job not paying as well, or his wife's new business expenses. I didn't press him. I just handed over the money, each time feeling a little more used. But today, there was a spark of defiance in me. Maybe it was the realization that I was being drained, or maybe it was something else. But this time, I was going to find out exactly what was going on. As I made my coffee, the world outside was still and calm. Yet inside me, a storm was building, one I couldn't ignore anymore. I had spent years raising him, loving him, and trusting him. But today, I would break through the illusion. Today, I would uncover the truth, no more blind faith. It wasn't until I stepped into the mall that the truth slapped me in the face, a cold shock to my chest that I couldn't ignore. I had been walking through the department store, lost in my thoughts, when I saw him. My son, standing there with his wife. At first, I didn't think anything of it, but then I saw the bag. A sleek, shiny Louis Vuitton logo caught the light, making it gleam like a dagger to my heart. His wife held it with such pride, her fingers brushing the leather strap as if it was a trophy. They were laughing together, chatting casually as if nothing was wrong. But the more I looked, the clearer it became. That bag wasn't just any purchase, it was my money. The same money I'd been sending month after month under the guise of supporting his child's education. The same money I had sacrificed, wondering if I could even afford the next grocery bill. I felt the blood rush to my face, my hands growing cold as a wave of nausea hit me. I thought about all the late-night phone calls, the excuses about tuition hikes, the endless promises that this would be the last time he'd ask for money. And now this. There it was, proof, in full color. His wife, parading around with a designer bag while my grandchild's future was supposedly being funded by the very same money. I stood frozen for a moment, unsure if I should confront him right there, in the middle of the store. But he was too busy, too engrossed in her to notice me. And then it hit me, he didn't even care. He didn't care about the sacrifices I'd made for him, for his family. He didn't care about the trust I had placed in him. To him, I was just a bank, and I was foolish enough to hand over my hard-earned money, never asking questions. The humiliation settled in deep, like a heavy weight on my chest. It wasn't just the betrayal that stung, it was the realization that he had no respect for me. He thought I was just some naive woman, who would never find out, never question his intentions. I had been a fool, and in that moment, I hated myself for not seeing it sooner. I turned away quickly, trying to hide the burning sensation in my eyes. I wasn't going to cry in front of them. I couldn't. But as I walked to the exit, the sting of that moment didn't fade. It only grew. And the one thought that echoed in my mind was, never again. I didn't confront him that day. As much as I wanted to storm up to him and demand an explanation, I knew better. I wasn't the type to act on impulse, to throw everything into chaos out of anger. No, I was someone who had spent years taking care of others, always patient, always measured. But this time, my patience wasn't just going to be a shield, it was going to be my weapon. For the next few days, I kept my distance. I didn't call him, didn't text. I simply went about my daily routine, quiet, deliberate, and with a newfound sense of resolve. I spent long hours sitting at my kitchen table, poring over bills, receipts, and the months of transactions I had quietly ignored. The numbers were starting to make sense in ways I hadn't allowed myself to see before. He had used me. I wasn't a mother or a grandmother to him anymore. I was an ATM. And it wasn't just the luxury bags, there were countless other things, the overpriced dinners, the vacations that seemed too lavish for a family that claimed to be struggling, the extravagant gifts for his wife that showed up regularly on social media. I had been blind to it all, playing the part of the doting mother and grandmother, too trusting, too kind-hearted to see what he was really doing. But now, as I sat there with the papers in front of me, I started seeing the cracks in his lies. Every time he asked for money, there was a new excuse, a new reason why he couldn't cover the costs. Yet there was always enough left over for luxuries. I knew I couldn't let this go on. But I also knew that if I confronted him too soon, I'd lose the upper hand. He had underestimated me. And that would be his downfall. The next step wasn't just about confronting him. It was about gathering power, silent, unseen power. So, I started reaching out to old friends and acquaintances, people I hadn't spoken to in years, people who could offer insight into his situation without him even knowing. A friend of mine worked in finance and owed me a favor, another was well connected in the local community and had insight into his business dealings. Slowly, piece by piece, I gathered the information I needed. But it wasn't just about the money, it was about how he saw me. To him, I was just an old woman who would keep handing over money without a question. I was someone who could be controlled by his sweet words and hollow promises, but he didn't know who he was dealing with. I had lived through far worse. I had survived losses, betrayals, and the kind of emotional bruising that would have broken someone weaker. I had learned over the years that the greatest strength often comes from the quietest places. It was the strength to endure, to wait, to keep going when the world wanted you to break. And that was what I would do now. I would make him see me for what I truly was, not just his mother, not just his soft spot to exploit, but a woman who had the strength to take back control. I wasn't going to lash out. I wasn't going to play into his manipulations. I would take the high road and let him dig his own hole. And when the time was right, I would step in, not with anger, but with the precision of someone who had been preparing for this moment for a long time. I smiled to myself, the weight of my own resolve settling in. It wasn't just the patience that made me strong. It was the quiet knowledge that, in the end, my actions would speak louder than any words I could say. He had thought I was weak. He was about to learn the truth. As the days passed, my son's requests didn't stop. In fact, they grew more frequent. The excuses became more elaborate, more desperate. The school's threatening to drop him out if we don't pay the back fees, he said one afternoon. I'm really stretched thin right now. Could you send a bit extra this time? The amount was always the same, $4,000. But the pressure in his voice was new, something I hadn't heard before. It was subtle, but I could feel the shift. He wasn't just asking for help anymore, he was pleading. But I wasn't fooled. The FAADE was cracking. I had anticipated this. A cornered animal doesn't behave the same way as one in control, and I knew this was the beginning of his downfall. But it wasn't just his behavior that had started to change, it was everything around us. The entire situation was becoming more tangled, more complex. The stakes were higher now, not just for him, but for me too. I could feel the weight of my decision settling on my shoulders. If I exposed him, if I confronted him with everything I knew, I could destroy our relationship for good. That would be the end of it. He would never look at me the same way again. The thought of losing him was unbearable, but I also couldn't stand being treated like a fool anymore. I wasn't going to be his enabler any longer. The breaking point came one evening, just after dinner, when my son came over, his hands shaking as he handed me a piece of paper. This is the final warning, he said, his voice strained. I need that money, or they're going to expel him. I don't know what else to do. I took the paper, my heart sinking as I glanced at it. It was an official-looking letter from the school, but something felt off. The tone was too formal, too generic. There was no mention of the child's name, no specific details about the fees or the amount due. It didn't add up. In fact, it looked more like a template. "I'll handle it," I said softly, trying to keep my voice calm. But in my mind, I was already making the connections. Something about this entire situation didn't make sense. I needed more information. I couldn't just confront him without having every detail lined up. So, I did what any mother would do. When faced with an unsolvable puzzle, I dug deeper. I began questioning people he knew, subtly inquiring about his financial situation. Friends, colleagues, even distant family members. What I learned was shocking. Not only was he in deeper debt than I had imagined, but the school fees weren't the only lies he had been feeding me. There were other creditors, other loans, more money he had been siphoning from me to pay off his personal whims and debts. I started getting whispers about his business ventures, the ones he'd casually mentioned in passing, but never explained. It was a small startup he'd started with a few other people. They were losing money fast, and rather than admitting failure, he was using my funds to cover the losses. That LV bag. It wasn't just a luxury, it was a symbol of his lies. It was the face of a man pretending everything was fine while burying himself in debt. The web was getting bigger, and with every thread I pulled, more secrets unraveled. He was in over his head. But what scared me more was the realization that if I didn't act now, the consequences wouldn't just affect him. The entire family could fall apart, his wife, my grandchild, even me. I was enabling him, yes. But I was also enabling a larger pattern of deception, one that could swallow us all. It was time to act. But I had to be careful. Every move I made had to be calculated, or it could backfire. The stakes were no longer just about money, it was about saving not just him, but the rest of the family from his own self-destruction. I knew the confrontation was coming, but it had to be at the right moment. I had to make sure everything was in place. I needed the final pieces of the puzzle. And then, when everything was ready, I would take control. The first move was small but crucial. I didn't confront him outright. Instead, I began to subtly cut off the flow of money. Each time he asked for more, I'd find a reason to delay. "I'll send it tomorrow," I'd say, but tomorrow never came. I'd pull up a new excuse, a different reason why I couldn't part with the money just yet. I told him I was handling my own finances, that I needed to be more careful with my spending. He wasn't happy, but he accepted it, for the moment. Behind the scenes, I took the next few weeks to put everything into place. I contacted the school directly under a false name, posing as a concerned family member. The receptionist was polite, but the information I gathered was priceless. The fees my son had mentioned were significantly lower than what he had led me to believe. More than that, the school had no record of an impending expulsion. The whole thing was a fabrication. I held on to the information like a secret weapon, biding my time. Meanwhile, I started to distance myself from him emotionally, removing myself from the roles I had played for years. No more phone calls just to check in. No more extra little gifts for his wife. I stopped showing up to family dinners, explaining that I had too much on my plate. He noticed, of course, and began calling more frequently. But I remained aloof, calm, collected. I knew he was getting anxious, and that was exactly what I wanted. People like him thrive on control, on having the upper hand. And as long as I played the role of the dutiful, caring mother and grandmother, he would continue to manipulate me. But now, I was the one holding all the cards. One day, while he was at work, I took a trip to his apartment. It wasn't planned, at least not entirely. I had a reason, a small excuse to drop by. I had to pick up something I had left behind, I told his wife over the phone. The moment I stepped inside, I saw it. The luxurious items that had been accumulating. The expensive furniture, the high-end electronics, the designer clothing in the closet. I had never thought to look before, trusting that they were doing the best they could. But seeing it now, in person, laid bare the full extent of the deception. I didn't act surprised, didn't show my shock. Instead, I made small talk, commenting on the new decor, feigning ignorance. But I was taking mental notes, marking every little detail. I could feel the pieces clicking together. The picture was becoming clearer with every passing day. But the real move came when I reached out to my lawyer. I wasn't planning to get legal advice just yet, but I knew it would be useful eventually. I began to gather everything, receipts, email correspondence, text messages, and the bank statements that showed the steady stream of money flowing from me to him. The lawyer agreed to help, but I made it clear I wasn't yet ready to act. He needed to be under my control first, to think he still had the upper hand. My next step was a face-to-face meeting with him. When I finally agreed to sit down with him, he looked relieved. He thought he had won, thought I was going to be his soft target once more. His eyes glinted with a mixture of desperation and expectation. "Mom, I really need this. You know how hard things have been," he began, the same tired excuses spilling from his lips. I smiled softly, the calmness I felt now surprising even myself. "I know, darling. But I think we need to talk about what's really going on." He froze, sensing the shift. "Your son's school fees. They aren't as much as you've been telling me," I said, watching as his expression shifted from shock to defensive. "And about your business, I know everything. Your creditors, your startup, that's all coming out of my pocket." His mouth opened and closed, the words failing him as he scrambled for a response. But it was too late. The trap had been set. "I've been gathering information," I continued, keeping my voice steady, "and I know you've been using me for far more than just tuition. All those things you've bought, all the debts you've piled up, it's my money, isn't it?" For a moment, he didn't respond. Then, with a nervous laugh, he tried to play it off. "Mom, it's not like that. I was just trying to." But I wasn't finished. "I trusted you, son. I trusted you with my money, my time, my love. But you lied to me. You took advantage of that trust. And now, I'm not going to let you do it anymore." I could see the realization hit him, he was no longer in control. The look in his eyes was a mix of fear and disbelief. He didn't know what to do. I stood up slowly, my voice calm but unwavering. "I've made arrangements. I've contacted the school. There is no tuition issue. I've been working with a lawyer, and if you don't change your ways, there will be consequences. I will not be your safety net anymore." His face fell. The FAADE he had built up so carefully began to crumble. He was no longer the manipulative son I had once seen as someone to protect, he was just a man backed into a corner. I turned to leave, but before I did, I paused and looked back at him. "I'm done being your fool. You'll have to face the consequences of your actions. But from now on, it's your responsibility, not mine." As I walked out the door, I could feel the weight lifting off my shoulders. This wasn't just about money. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my control, and my place in this family. The comeback had begun, and I was ready for whatever came next. The days following that conversation were tense. I could feel the storm brewing inside my son, the anger and frustration eating away at him, but he didn't show it. He kept his distance, perhaps thinking I'd back down, maybe assuming that I was bluffing. But I wasn't backing down. I was done with his lies, done with being the source of his comfort, while he tore apart the family with his deceit. I knew it was coming. I could feel it in the air, a confrontation so inevitable that the only question was when it would happen. It came 3 days later, in the most unexpected of places, a Sunday dinner at my house. I had invited the entire family over, a simple meal in an attempt to keep the peace, though deep down, I knew it was all a prelude to what was to come. The moment he walked in, I could see it on his face, the simmering rage, the tension in his jaw, the tightness in his eyes. He had rehearsed what he was going to say. But I had rehearsed too. We all sat down at the table, and for the first few minutes, it felt like a normal family dinner. But the silence between us was heavy, thick with unspoken words, with unfinished business. My daughter-in-law, trying to cut through the tension, asked about the school, about his son's progress. And that was it, he snapped. I can't keep doing this, he said, his voice low but harsh. The table went quiet. This constant pressure, this feeling like I'm drowning. I can't handle it anymore. He looked directly at me, eyes filled with a mixture of defiance and accusation. You think you've got all the answers, don't you? You think you know everything about my life, but you have no idea what it's like to be me. His words hit me, but I didn't flinch. I knew this was the moment. He was trying to provoke me, to put me on the defensive. But I wasn't going to play his game anymore. You're right, I said, keeping my voice even. I don't know what it's like to live a life of deceit. To take money from my own mother under false pretenses, to manipulate the people who love me. My words hung in the air, and I watched as his face contorted with disbelief. You're crazy, he spat, standing up abruptly. You think you're some kind of hero, but you don't know anything about my life. You don't know the pressure I'm under. I'm doing this for the family, your grandchild, your daughter-in-law. And you repay me by turning your back on me. Don't you dare turn this around, I shot back, my voice rising slightly. You've been lying to me, using me, and you've been so blinded by your own self-pity that you haven't seen the damage you've caused. You've been living a lie, and I've been enabling it. But not anymore. The tension was palpable. My son's face had gone pale, his lips trembling with anger. My daughter-in-law, sitting quietly beside him, looked between us, with a mix of confusion and fear. It was clear she didn't know the full extent of what was happening, and I wasn't sure if she was completely aware of his financial deceit either. But now wasn't the time for subtlety. It was time for truth. I know about your business, I continued, locking eyes with him. I know about the debts, the loans, the fake school fees, and I know about the things you've been buying with money that doesn't belong to you. That LV bag. The one you gave to your wife. It's all part of your charade. His eyes widened, and for the first time, I saw panic flash across his face. But I wasn't done. I've already contacted your school, and I've verified everything. There's no financial issue. You've been lying to me, using me as your safety net while you live beyond your means. Your son's education was never in jeopardy. But your future. That's a different story. He stammered, looking for a way out. Mom, please. No, I cut him off. This isn't about excuses. This is about the truth. You've used every excuse in the book, and you've drained me emotionally and financially. But it stops here. I'm not your ATM anymore, and I'm not going to stand by while you destroy everything around you, for the sake of your pride. The room fell silent, the weight of my words settling in like a stone in Evrion's stomach. My son opened and closed his mouth, unable to form a response. His usual bravado was gone, replaced by something I hadn't seen in years, vulnerability. Fear. For the first time, he wasn't the one holding the power. I'm done, I said, standing up. I've been your crutch long enough. But I'm not going to let you drag me down with you. It's your mess now, and you're going to have to face the consequences. My son stood frozen, unable to speak. His wife didn't know what to say either. I could feel the heat of their eyes on me, but I didn't falter. This was the turning point, the moment when everything changed. I'm not angry, I said, as calmly as I could. I'm disappointed. But more than anything, I'm done. I turned to leave the room, but before I did, I looked back at him. This is your last chance, son. Fix your life. Fix your family. But don't think I'll keep enabling your lies. Not anymore. As I left the room, I could feel the weight of the confrontation still hanging in the air. My heart was pounding, but I knew I had done the right thing. For too long, I had been the one bending and adjusting, trying to fix everything. But now, the power had shifted. The lines had been drawn. I had confronted him with the truth, and the rest was up to him. The weeks after the confrontation were a blur of emotions. I didn't expect him to change overnight. Change wasn't something that came easily for someone like him, but something was different now. The air was heavy with the weight of our last conversation, and every time we spoke, I could hear the strain in his voice. The arrogance was gone. The entitlement was gone. And in its place, a certain humility, perhaps even fear. I continued to keep my distance, letting the silence settle like a blanket between us. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one reaching out. I wasn't the one trying to smooth over the tension, or pretending that everything was fine. I let him stew in his own mistakes, letting him come to terms with the fact that I wasn't going to be his safety net anymore. But then, something unexpected happened. It was a Thursday morning when I received a call from the school. I answered the phone, surprised to hear the principal on the other end. His voice was steady, but there was an edge to it. "Mrs. Taylor, I wanted to personally inform you that your son has come to us with a new payment plan for his child's tuition. I just wanted to confirm that this is all in order." At first, I didn't understand. My son had never paid his child's school fees without me stepping in. But I listened, nodding slowly as the principal explained. He went on to tell me that my son had come clean to the school about his financial situation, explaining the source of his debt, and his inability to meet the fees before. It seemed that for the first time, he was taking responsibility. After I hung up the phone, I sat in stunned silence. This was it, the change I'd been waiting for. But it wasn't just about paying the tuition. It was about the fact that he was finally, truly facing the reality of his actions. The following week, he called me again. This time, it wasn't to ask for money. I could hear the difference in his voice, the weight of it all pressing down on him. "Mom," he said, his voice hoarse. "I'm sorry. I didn't know how deep I'd gotten myself into it. I didn't realize what I was doing until you confronted me. I was wrong. I'll pay back every cent I took from you." I could feel the sincerity in his words, the regret, the acknowledgement of what he had done. But there was something else, something I hadn't expected, a quiet pride. He had finally made a decision to take responsibility for his life, for his mistakes, without trying to cover them up. "Thank you," I said, my voice tight, but steady. "I'm proud of you for stepping up. It's not easy, but you're doing the right thing now. That's what matters." We didn't talk for long. He didn't have to say anything more. I knew this wasn't a clean slate, it was a new beginning. And I was willing to give him that. But only if he truly meant it. The real vindication came 2 months later, on a warm Sunday afternoon, when I was sitting in the garden, sipping tea. My son, surprisingly, showed up at my door. He didn't come with an excuse or a gift, but simply with a small envelope. "Mom, I wanted to pay you back." He handed me the envelope, and when I opened it, I found a check for the full amount I had lent him, every cent. There were no more excuses, no more lies. He had paid it all back, plus interest. He had made his own sacrifices, cut back on luxuries, and worked hard to pay back what he owed. It was an action that spoke louder than any words could. "I'm sorry for everything, Mom. I let you down. But I'll never take advantage of you again," he said quietly. I looked at him for a long moment, not knowing exactly what to say. It wasn't about the money anymore. It wasn't even about the debt. It was about the person standing in front of me. The man who had finally taken responsibility, the son who had learned what it meant to value the trust he had broken. "I believe you," I said, my voice soft but resolute. "This is the start of something new. Just keep moving forward." He nodded, a tear welling in his eye. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had my son back, not the manipulative, entitled man I had been dealing with, but the man I had always hoped he would become. That evening, as I sat alone, reflecting on the last few months, I realized that this was the ultimate victory. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the reclamation of my power, the restoration of my dignity, and the realization that I could protect myself, even from those I loved most. In the end, I didn't need to be a martyr. I didn't need to sacrifice my happiness or my well-being for others. Because the truth was, when I stopped enabling his lies, I had freed us both. My son, too, had finally learned that real growth comes from owning up to your mistakes, not just for the sake of others, but for yourself. I could finally breathe easy, knowing that the lies had been exposed, the debts paid, and the future ahead of us was open to the possibility of redemption. No more manipulation. No more deceit. And for once, I was at peace with my decision.